I'm Jasmine Moradi, and you are listening to the Power of Audio, Science, and AI. My guest today is Dr. Hane Aung, co-founder of GroovSense, a leading global UK music tech company on a mission to automate the social music playing experience via their AI music selection app. Dr. Hane is an associate professor in computer science and has a PhD in machine learning. He specializes in intelligent systems that monitor human behavior. In his research, he has worked on subjects such as affective computing, aka artificial emotional intelligence, and ubiquitous computing for a wide range of applications. He was formerly a lead researcher in the People-Aware Computing Laboratory at Cornell University and part of the HCI Research Centre at University College London. In this episode, Dr. Hane and I will discuss the ins and outs of automating the social music playing experience using artificial emotional intelligence technologies to create the perfect playlist. This subject is very close to my heart as I used to work 3 years with event management in London. The GroovSense app is now live on the App Store and Google Play Store, so you can go and download it and start using it today. With that, Dr. Hane, I welcome you and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you to Jasmine for having me. What a great introduction.
Yes, I look forward to sharing your story. So how are you feeling today and where are you?
So I'm in Norfolk. That's where I live. I'm based in the UK. But as you mentioned, I used to live in London and I used to live in the US for a while and sort of been here, there and everywhere on my journeys throughout my career, really. But nowadays I'm sort of settled in Norwich, if people know, in Norfolk, and this is where I live and this is where I'm based at the moment.
Lovely. So let's get into your background and who you are. So I read a line that you are a breakdancer. So I'm curious to know, what is your earliest memory of music and when did you know you had a talent for dancing?
Well, I need to correct you slightly there. I used to be a breakdancer. I don't want people to start sort of asking me to do things at this, I'm at this age. But so yeah, I did used to do that. In terms of when I had a propensity to dancing, I guess I would have to say I always liked to move to music. That's something I did as a child, actually. So when there was music, I always liked to move to it. I might have got that from my mother because she was a former dancer herself. Might be in the genes. And my brother dances, and this, part of my family is in the arts and music as well. So I've always just liked moving to sound. I've always liked movement as a child, and that manifested into going and learning dancing. And as I got a bit older, I thought, well, that looks very great to do, breakdancing or b-boying as it's known in the inner circles. And I was lucky enough to meet some people who were doing it when I was living in Liverpool at the time. And they helped me to learn it and get better at it a little bit for what it was worth. I was never as good as them, to be honest. But I did it for a while, and it was a great hobby. I loved it. It was, I wish I could still do it, but I can't.
So going from the dancing, then I want to know, what was then your inner motivational drive and the curiosity as a boy that brought you then to study and work in the behavioral computer science industry, especially with then artificial emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so that's a fairly long journey that has a sort of a projection which we'll talk about. So when I started, so I didn't really start out as a formal dancer when I was very young. I just liked it and I started learning it as I got a bit older. Having said that, in parallel to all of that stuff, I was always been a bit of a nerd in school. I always liked science. I always liked the scientific subjects at school and things like that. And I liked computing as well. I went on to study engineering at university as an undergraduate. The course I took had a big robotics component to it, so it was sort of a robotics degree. It had nothing to do with the robotic dancing, by the way. So that was, I just want to make that clear. I learned that, and through that, I started to learn about the idea of machines being intelligent and artificial intelligence as a broad term. And that was, you know, in the late 90s, when it wasn't really that prevalent in terms of public discussion, AI. It was sort of this niche thing that people were looking at in those days. And I was very interested in it. It was a very curious thing to me about how machines can emulate what human beings do. And as I, you know, fast forwarding a few more years, I ended up doing research in that area. And part of that was about how people interact with each other and how they behave, and how machines can learn about the nature of that, and also learn about how people behave, which is part of actually what GrooveSense is all about. So that's really where it came from. So I sort of cut through several years of my learning trajectory in a couple of sentences there. But that's what got me to that point, and I'm still learning, actually. So it's a fascinating area.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, I am a science nerd too. So it's a great thing to be proud of today. So you went along and you studied a PhD in machine learning, and then you ended up working as a data scientist at Health Rhythms. And then until now, then like up to 2018, you co-founded GrooveSense. So tell us about the journey and the learnings along the way.
Yeah, so after I finished my undergraduate degree in engineering, electrical engineering and robotics, I stayed at the University of Liverpool at the time and did a PhD. And I sort of focused more into the AI side of things. And I was lucky enough to get a placement to do a PhD there. And actually in those days, it wasn't really called machine learning. That sort of term appeared more prevalent later on, but it was still to do with what we call, at those days we call it pattern recognition, and it was to do with image pattern recognition and what we can get from images and how machines can interpret images through AI techniques. And specifically, what I did was a technique called neural networks. So I did that and did a PhD in that and learned a lot from there. And that was mostly in those days to do with health applications and X-rays and things like that, which we worked on at the time. Following on from that, I did, as academics will know, I did a couple of positions as a postdoctoral researcher. I was lucky enough to move into a very good group at University College London, where I started to learn about how machines can look at behavior. And this is where the behavioral science comes into play, using machine learning. So I'm using my machine learning background. And it was to do with how people move. It was to do with body expressivity and motion. And we also worked with great teams in other universities that looked at face expression and voice and all sorts of other behavioral cues that people express, and how we can create algorithms and machine learning models that can understand what's going on with that person through their expression. So that was another part of my journey where I was lucky enough to learn a great deal of stuff in that role. Moving on a little bit further, I then moved to the United States, where I had another research position at Cornell University, as you mentioned. There, it was more about how that behavioral science can be applied in not just in a laboratory setting, but also in the outside world, and in the so-called real world, or sometimes called in the wild. And that was done primarily through sensing technologies that you can get off the shelf, in particular sensors that you get in the smartphone. So where the movement sensors or the locational sensors or various other sensors you get in smartphones, and what we can learn about people's behavior through those sensors as well. So there was a further evolution to the applicability to this behavioral science. And that's where I worked in the Peopleware Computing Lab. And there was a company that was associated with that lab that worked, that was founded in New York City, which I helped with for a while in the beginning of that company called Health Rhythms, as you mentioned. And they focused on how this behavioral science through smartphones and data analysis through smartphones can be applied for various mental health applications. So how people behave differently because of different mental health conditions. So that was the specific topic of health rhythms. And that's where I learned about that. And great, again, lucky enough to get some really great experience through them. I then took a position, I came back to the UK, and I was sort of a gap a little bit in my working phase. And I met up with an old friend of mine. Well, I was already in contact with him, but I reconnected with an old friend of mine, Mizan Rahman, who used to work in the banking sector in London at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. And he was also in this sort of in-between phase as me. And we sort of got together and says, look, let's think about doing something. He wanted to get into the technology world and see if there's any interesting startups that we could consider that we think would be we think we could work. And I had long discussions with him at the time, and that's where the idea of GrooveSense came about. And we thought to bring together his experience in product development. He has some great experience doing that, and in technology and product development there, especially from the banking sector that he was very successful at. And then I thought, okay, well, I have some ideas about how we could bring to bear some recent research that I've been involved in, and how this might be useful in the music sector. And I can explain later on why I thought the music sector was an area that was ripe for this technology to be used in terms of human expressivity. So that's the overall journey, and that's where we got to. And now, GrooveSense has been running ever since 2018.
Very interesting. I mean, I see your breakdancing, I see the technology, I see the movement and the love of understanding people. Like you all of those learnings became, the GrooveSense. So GrooveSense is a music selection app that you guys have created for people who love music, but also for them that love to entertain others. And here you use your experience of the combination of artificial emotional intelligence technology to help users create the perfect playlist. I worked in the music industry for many years, and I've done events, and I know the challenge of what is the perfect playlist, how do you create it? And with GrooveSense, you automatically improve a host playlist in real time to play the music that everyone will like, whatever the location or events. So here, can you tell us how you came up with the idea, why the music industry, and what problem are you really trying to solve?
There's a number of things there that I would like to sort of take piece by piece. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I have a propensity for dancing, and I like to go to these social events, and I like to enjoy myself. And I've been doing that for probably longer than I've been doing my science side of things. In a way, I could probably say that I've been doing these observational studies informally, perhaps not as an academic, but just as another person in that space. Informally, I've been doing these observational studies for 20 years, but even something like that, in various social settings, in various music festivals or clubs or bars or places where people set up and do dancing for all that time. And obviously, I've picked up implicitly or explicitly, I've picked up how people behave in all of these different settings. And one thing that occurred to me is that, as you mentioned, and as you well know better than me, that industry of trying to get the music right is always been something that a lot of people strive for. And there are various theories and methods and ideas about how one ought to do that. But one thing that what I saw, especially when I was doing things informally on my nights out, was that as a standard, and I don't mean specialist venues where things, particularly special things happen with a high, a big name band or some superstar DJ or something. I don't mean situations like that, but when you have sort of these run-of-the-mill, to want of a better term, run-of-the-mill settings, like somebody's throwing a house party, or somebody's just having some private gathering or something like that, or even a small local bar or something where there isn't even a DJ. And when you have these, let's say, everyday settings, the music that's really played is in most cases rather preset. So somebody might want a particular atmosphere. Some people might just want to play a particular set of songs because that's what they have. And there's the thinking into what to play doesn't really go further beyond that. It's just what they decide to play, and that's what's going to happen. And the customers or the guests or the people, either will like it or won't like it, and it's just it's luck in a way, right? Whether they get it right. So I was thinking that we're at the position in terms of technology now where it doesn't really have to be that way. At least even in these everyday settings, it doesn't really have to be like that anymore. Why? Because, well, we have smartphones. Establishments have their own computing systems inside their homes. Hosts of the house have their own technologies, and all of these gadgets and technology devices can speak to each other. We can communicate within the four walls of that space, so we can learn more about each other, or just from that particular group setting. And one very easy thing that you might imagine, and to be fair, there are other technologies that are in this space already, is that we can give information to the host to say, okay, this is the sort of thing I like, and the playlist can take that in. The playlist creator can take that into consideration, and if there is a common thread amongst, let's say, 10 people, we can take that and uprank those songs that are of that common thread, and give people a better time of what they like. And that's surely better than an arbitrary set of tracks that could go well or might not go well. So that was the very basic thinking. It was very, very basic thinking at that point. And that's where we wanted to apply part of what GrooveSense does. However, but further to that, where my research background comes in, is further to just the recommendations according to what people might like, which is what people already are doing to some level. I also thought that, well, that's great, that side of thing is great, but how do we then know how it went, right? How do we then know, did it actually work then? So what we thought would be good, we play it, and then we also ought to have some way of understanding how it went. Now, the sort of standard way of doing that, and at the moment, is to ask people, right? Is to say, did you like that song? Or how was that, did you rate that song? Or did you enjoy the night? And that sort of thing. So we can do that, but the behavioral sensing side of things, rather than asking people surveyed questions and reporting on how things went as a feedback to businesses or even just the success of a private gathering, we can bring to bear some of this behavioral sensing technology, which we spoke about earlier, because we now better understand through data science and computer science what different expressions mean in any given setting. And rather than asking people one by one, and even if they even bothered to answer the questions, which a lot of people don't, by the way, and it being subjective. So if you ask the question, did you rate it a 1 to 5 star, or, you know, thumbs up or thumbs down? Some people, what I see as a 5 star might be different to what you see as a 5 star, right? So there's difference in opinion there. So what we wanted to do was to go further, and we believe that looking at the behavioral sensing technology, we can get a more objective and more universal picture of what happened over the night, for the same reasons. And computer science has got better at doing that. And the insight from the my music side was that, given the way people behave in these sorts of settings, the behavioral, let's say the expressivity is more expressive in these social settings. So people dance, people clap, people might shout and whistle, and there's a lot of expression going on that can be captured, compared to, say, the office, right? Where you might be on your best behavior and you might not be doing all of that, hopefully not. Hopefully that, so it's harder to apply the science to certain settings, but the insight that we have at GrooveSense is that the social setting, and especially with music setting, parties, for example, have high levels of energy and high levels of expressivity, which can be more readily detected, and we can then use as understanding of how things went. So that is, I hope I managed to capture all of that in your question there. But that is the broad thinking of why we identified hospitality and that sector and the music sector as a ripe sector for applying this technology.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. Exactly like you. I mean, before I got into the whole music science area, I was conducting events and I was attending events, early by myself, and the whole power of the DJ, of how you keep, the crowd, keep them on the floor. And then that sometimes when you change the music and people don't like it, then instantly people are like, oh, let's go for a drink instead. And I also agree with you in terms of, you can't really ask people, it's all about conscious and subconscious mind, right? And asking people directly, how did you experience it? It differs between people, and then a word of amazing really doesn't express the actual feelings. So I've always also been very interested about, how do we, like you guys do, use machine learning to analyze the mood of a crowd as it changes, and to be able to identify, positive and negative expressions. And it's really cool that in a space as a retail where there's a lot of happenings, as you say, try to capture that and mapping it in a positive way. So I downloaded your app. Walk us through then, for me and our listeners, how can we as a private person use the app?
One of our products we have at GrooveSense is the app that you can download if you search for GrooveSense, so GROOVSENSE, in both stores. And what that basically functions as is a sort of a communal music selection system. And it's based on one person being the host. So if you can set up a session, so if you download the app and log in as a host, you can set up a session for your room, for your house or your room, or wherever you're setting up a session. And we can do this in two ways. You can do this in live, and we can do this remotely. We set up remotely as a response to COVID, but I'll talk about the live side for now. So if you set up, let's say you put in, you have a streaming service. So the host has to be subscribed to a streaming service, and and they can stick in the audio jack and play it through their speakers or whatever, at home, and play music as they would normally play, as you do at a party. Quite a lot of people do this sort of thing. But the difference is, when you have GrooveSense, then if you download GrooveSense, the app, and log in as a guest, all your guests can then find your session in the app. Hopefully, if you can give them a link, or if you can make it public, they can look for it and log into that session. Then they will have a view of what the music track list will be currently, and also what's projected to come in the next few 5 to 10 songs that's coming up, that's about to be played, about to be queued. And they can already rate those if they want to. They can already tell us if they like them. They can even tell us if they don't like those songs before it's even played. The other thing that happens is they can also, as they log in, they can do a very quick very quick questionnaire where they just click a couple of genres and a few different areas of music that they like, and tell us about that. Or we can look at, if they allow look at what sort of playlists they have been looking at and listening to already. So we can already get a sense of what the guests are into. And as all the guests join and do this, the algorithm on the back end will take all of that into account and look at what the host wants to play. Now, it's not just going to be just a pure voting system, because we don't think that would work, because it could potentially be too haphazard. So there are sort of techniques that were put in by some of my very clever team that has helped to work on this, in terms of making sure that it all falls in line with what the hosts want. So the host can set boundaries in terms of what sort of music they want to keep in, if they want to, or if there's a certain playlist they want to stick to, and look at all of the combinations that could happen according to what the host wants, and also balancing it with what the guests like. And then what's recreated is an update every few minutes or so, according to what we recommend that happens. Now, the other bit that happens is it doesn't stop there. That's only this first step, actually. It doesn't stop there. What then happens is we monitor what's going on. So this is where the behavioral sensing side comes into play. So that we can do this in a couple of different ways. We can see if so one of the things that we have as a first proprietary behavioral sensing technology is what we call dance IQ, or a dance detector. So that utilizes the accelerometer inside everybody's phones and understands when the motion is reflective of a dance movement. Going back to my dance background, I would naturally want something like that in my phone. So that is also an expression of positive engagement in the song. If you're dancing, of course it is. And we can do that through our accelerometer, and we believe GrooveSense is the first to do that. Further to that, we can also think about more basic things like how many people have liked a song or disliked it, or even things like, have people left the venue? Have people sort of left in their droves, or are they sticking with that current event? So more basic things like that. So we can look at all of that in combination and keep monitoring the situation. The idea behind it is that we can keep it dynamic. We don't need to set a playlist, see how it works, and then get some feedback, and that's it. So it can be updated on a more minute-by-minute level. So, for example, if, let's say, everybody stops dancing, everybody's giving a thumbs down, they don't like this music at all, it's not really working, we can suggest to the host, or we can look at alternatives that are perhaps different to what's already going. Or if everybody's really enjoying themselves and everything's going swimmingly, the next queued songs can be very similar to perhaps what's already being played, and we keep that going because that's a success. So because we understand that you only have one shot at a good party, right? You can't have them come back You only have one shot at making a good impression and wanting your friends to have a good time. You want to get it right, okay? So as you know, so there's only time is the thing you can't get back. So that's why we made it dynamic, and that's why we wanted to use this dynamic system to do that. So that's how it would work in our currently available app, and we've tested it and we've tried it out in a couple of developmental sessions already, and we found some quite interesting results.
I always say music makes it or breaks a party. No matter how well, you know, the theme is, the food is, it's actually when you put the music or bringing a DJ or an artist together, that you bring all those pieces together, that everything comes alive. And I love what you're talking about, the different metrics that you guys track. And I love field research and discovering user insights. And you've actually tested GrooveSense at a private student event where you went through these different metrics, such as users joining and leaving the session, user requests, likes, dislikes, user dance events, and individual track starts and ends. So then I want to know, walk us through the research setup, your findings, and the ABBA journey, as you call it. What did you learn about the crowd?
In our development for this app, we set up some private test sessions, and we had helping us, and we're very grateful to the University College Dance Society. So if any of them listening, thank you very much, guys, for coming along. But one thing we didn't do was we didn't tell them exactly on purpose. As you know, as a researcher, you should not prime your subjects too much, right? That's not good practice. So we didn't tell them exactly what was going to happen, but there was a broad understanding of what was going to happen, further to the sort of data consent and things like that. So so we basically ran a typical small scale student night of about 40, 50 people. And they all tested the app. They all had to download it, and we were running we were looking at the data and collecting the data as the night went on. They knew it was an experiment, and everybody was signed up to that. But there was no DJ. That person didn't exist. So it was done through GrooveSense, and they saw that there was an initial suggested playlist. They were interacting with that playlist. They were judging whether they liked it. They were making requests as the night went on, and the combination of all of those things, plus the amount of people dancing, the amount of people leaving the venue at any given time or coming in, how long they stayed for, and things like that. We collected all of that data, and we wanted to understand, and that particular event was our first real life event that we did outside of our own labs, outside of our own data science room. So we were very keen to analyze what was going on there. And looking back at the data, and by the way, we got some great feedback. So, the participants enjoyed it. They thought it was interesting, that they have a say, that they have some power in terms of what was going to happen, and that was unusual. They didn't sort of ever have that before, so that was an interesting experience for them. And people danced, and people liked it. People enjoyed themselves. It at face value, just looking at it just from a neutral observation point of view, it seemed like it was a reasonably successful night, and people enjoyed themselves. And there was no music agenda. There was no music genre agenda per se. We sort of let things happen as we wanted it to happen. But so just on the point of genres, one thing that was very interesting was we looked at the progression of the music as it progressed over the night. And like I said, this is students, so these were mostly people between sort of 18, 19, 20, early 20s age brackets, much younger than me. And we thought that, okay, that's fine. That's the sort of grouping we have here today. So we might get a lot of more recent music and more sort of more cutting edge, more recent genres that might get played, probably by a bunch of artists that I've never heard of. and so that I probably never realized was even a genre or something like that. So I thought that was the sort of thing that was going to happen, but it doesn't matter if that's what the guests want, that's what they're going to get. So, my initial instincts was that's the sort of thing that was going to happen. But what was quite interesting was, and the reason I bring this up is if I were, say, somebody that was setting up that a venue as an event, let's say, I might look at the sort of guests I'm getting, and I might make some prejudgment about what they might like. And I might set that up in a way, as you run events, you might have seen people do similar sorts of things. And I might have decided to do, very cutting edge music and recent music, because I think, everybody's, there's lots of young people here and that's what they'll like as an assumption, right? But had I done that, I would have got it badly wrong, which was the interesting thing. It turns out that, and this is why we call it the ABBA Journey, it turned out that the best reaction we got, and from these 18 to 22-year-olds was, ABBA. Everybody knows ABBA. Yes, of course, everybody likes ABBA. Yes, and I can see the argument that, well, everybody likes ABBA, so that's going to happen, right? But yes, that is true in a sense. But it was so much more well received than even the the things that are highly popular right now in terms of the charts and things like that, which were requested and were played at some points in the night. And that was interesting, and that was a curious observation in the sense that was something that we did not expect. It might have been if it was a room full of old fogies like me, that was explainable, but it didn't happen there. And they loved it, and then they kept requesting more of that. And the dance rate, so as we detect the dance in everybody's phone, the movement in everybody's phone, we can see that as a signal in the back-end data. We can see which songs had the highest ratings of dancing for the longest periods of time. And it was those sort of 70s and it's even 80s music that I thought that they might not even know about. It shows how much I know. But they did know about that, and it might have just been that particular cohort of people. But the point is, I'm not making generalizations about people of that age. The point is, what matters is the people in the room, and whoever it is in the room, and we can then focus on what those particular people like or dislike, and that's how it works. So it did turn up some surprises. Is the take home of this, and that's what we learned. That this kind of thing can, create some surprising trajectories in the music that you might not expect as an event organizer or as a host of a party. And this is one of the curious things about using GrooveSense. And another interesting aspect is that we also did a correlation test against what happened in the night versus some generic metrics that you get with songs. So one of the metrics that you get with metadata, rather not metrics, metadata points that you get with songs is this value of what's called danceability. And those who do data science on music and songs might have seen this metadata of danceability. And that's created by streaming services or other people who have curated this sort of data point and decided that this song is highly danceable and that song isn't highly danceable, or this song is highly popular, based on whatever global estimates they have. But then we looked at danceability, and because we had Dance Detector, we wanted to see the correlation between what the streaming services decided that was the danceable song and what actually happened in our night. And we might have expected some sort of correlation, and there was none. There was none. There was no correlation. In fact, in some cases, it was a little bit negative. So if I were to use danceability as, say, a metadata to create a dancey night, to curate a dancing night for some, for some event, I'm saying, and you get a particular subset of people, it might not work. That's the point I'm making. It might not work. for that set of people. So for our set of people that we got, the danceability, and so, you know, what I'm saying is the danceability of the tracks, we know as ground truth because we're detecting it. And we don't then need to rely on these global estimates, which is based on whatever it's based on. And that could be badly wrong. So those are the sorts of insights that we were getting in our first experimental setup. And this is the point I'm making about the real-time behavioral sensing is really what you want, because that's really what is happening on the ground, rather than these estimates that you're making beforehand in order to assume what's going to happen on the ground. So technology is moving away from that, and GrooveSense is bringing that to bear, at least in these music settings. So that's really what we learned, and it was very interesting. And we're doing more analysis, because since then we've had a lot more sessions that we ran, and we're doing more analysis on all of those, and we're learning things and always improving.
Wow, I'm just listening, stunned of how impressive this is. This is like what the market has been waiting for such a long time. And I just want to reflect a little bit, like, yes, it was a small test, but me coming from doing my first test at university, also it always starts with small tests, and then you start seeing indications, and then you can do bigger. And to be the first ones to be able to start mapping it out and figure things out, it's really impressive. And also, like, the results is basically contextual, which means that similar to each, you know, location, party, what the people is. We're coming from the club industry, like in the London, if you're east, south, north, you know, they choose the music based on those type of people, and then people are driven to those areas based on that. And I also want to reflect back to when you were talking about using the app of liking and disliking. I was just seeing myself when I was young, you know, going up to the DJ, like daring going up to the DJ and say, please, can you play this song that I like? And now you know that you don't have to do that. But I also see this in terms of, because looking at coming again from the club industry, you don't always play what the people like. You also want to create, like with branding, like this is the vibe that we want. And if it's an event that you tell people, like, for example, I love house music, this is like the evening of that, and then the crowd will come based on that. But what I was thinking when I was listening, it was like, it's an amazing part, because then it's mostly like, okay, we do love house music going there, but how do you like maximize the impact of like making people, like, you know, the DJs are great at, like, make them higher and higher, and you're just like, okay, this song works, and then this song works, and then you just keep going. That's really impressive. And you don't really want to replace a DJ's work. So how can then DJs harness from your technology?
So at the moment, one thing we're currently developing is what we're calling the DJ Dashboard. So it will be an extension to what we already have, but specifically designed for DJs. So we understand we have DJs that are helping us in our team, actually. Mizan's a former DJ, the co-founder. We also have a very experienced DJs as part of our GrooveSense team, even in-house. So we understand what DJs have to do, the pressure they're under, the reason they have to make the right selections. And it is about ultimately selecting. And it is ultimately making sure that that journey that you take the audience on is the best one that you can get for that night. So we created this dashboard, which basically helps to augment their decision-making process. So one thing that the DJs can't know, for example, very easy example, is they can't know what the audience like unless they know them personally and they know who they are, which, you know, rarely happens, not always happens. But let's say you just have some, you know, bunch of strangers in the room that showed up. You can only really go off of sort of what they're reacting to begin with. But wouldn't it be great to have a graphic that tells you, hey, this is a predominantly rock crowd, or this is a predominantly hip hop crowd, and based on the overall picture of who's in the room, just as a starting point. And then what we can do with that is we can take that information, look at the sorts of music or the sorts of tracks that the DJ tends to play. So we're not asking the DJ to go completely off script and to completely play music that they're very alien to playing, and they don't tend to want to do that, because ultimately it is their performance and it is their tone that they want to set as a DJ themselves. We understand that, but to give informed suggestions, to say perhaps maybe put these particular tracks at the early part of the night. Maybe they're a bit slower, so people aren't really dancing anyway. And they will like it because we know this group of people happen to be into that particular artist or that particular decade or that particular genre. And we can, as music is the mapping of music and how they relate to each other is a multi-dimensional and very sort of continuous space, right? It's not these all belong in this bin and those all belong in that bin and never the twain have any relationship. So that's not how it works, as you well know. So we can look at nuanced suggestions to say, okay, maybe try that one. We know you've got that in your track list. Maybe put that one in behind that one. And obviously it has to flow as well. So we have a smoothing parameter that makes sure that we're not having, the tracks aren't jumping from one thing to another too harshly. So that also helps the DJ make a quick and guided decision in terms of what to select next and what to cue next. So we have this DJ dashboard. It's on its way, and we hope to test that very soon. And we hope that they will benefit from that and really, have good results in their playing when they're playing and they're doing their job. So so that's coming up in terms of DJ technology. And obviously, whenever we trial this, we always get feedback from them. And the point that I really want to end on with this is we have DJs helping us design this already. So we're keeping, the stakeholders are in the design loop, and I'm a big believer in that. And in terms of making sure we not going to assume what they want, we want to know what they want from us. And that's something that I want to add about the DJ dashboard. It's on its way.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to share something that popped up in my mind is that I know a lot of music producers, and a couple of years ago, I read the book, The Song Machine Inside the Hit Factory, that they talk about like the fascinating journey of how to create the hit song. And I'm just seeing this also like in terms of how producers can use it to figure out how do we reach that, hit song, that song that's, keeps people coming, dancing and it's amazing what it can do. But let's go also back to my research that I've done then, looking into brand fit music in like retail stores, restaurant, clubs, etc. The challenge that I saw in the industry is, okay, great, you can put together this playlist, so-called brand fit music, but how does that really affect my brand and my my clients coming into my venue? And I saw a challenge there, because how would you be able to monitor a map of what's going into a venue rather than just looking into like a playlist of 600 songs? So we talked about how we privately can use GrooveSense. Now I'm super curious to discuss about how businesses can benefit from your technology.
So just take a step back from music playing businesses in general. So, and just to reiterate that businesses always want to know how customers feel, right? I mean, that's the bottom line of a lot of technology. We're always bombarded with questions like, oh, let's say you stayed at a hotel, how was your stay? Did you like this movie when you watch it on Netflix? Or Did you, 1 to 5 star rating of how was your experience for this thing and that thing? And we're always bombarded with these questions because businesses are desperate to know how it went, how you feel. So this approach of giving questions, let's say, and asking is okay. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing particularly terrible about it, and it does work. But as you well know, it's only partial because you only get to ask some of the people. Most people probably won't engage. And again, it's subjective. It's what does that even mean? What is a 5-star mean for one person, or what does amazing mean, right? Like you said earlier. And unless some people might give a 1 star or a 0 star because something unfortunate happened that really wasn't anything to do with what they were really asking in the first place, right? So there's always confusion and ambiguity. So just in terms of behavioral sensing as a general concept, what I'm saying in terms of the music in this space, the industry in this space, in the music space, is that we can then, computer science, and in some part the subfield of effective computing, is beginning to allow more objective and comprehensive understanding of how it went. In a more empirical way, and in a way that it does include everybody, depending on the sensing, but would include. And why? Because it's what we call passive. The data is collected regardless of just based on what the people are doing. Naturally, they don't have to do anything further than like come and answer questions. It's based on how they're reacting through their expressions and their behavior. So that passive sensing is always going to give continuous information. That's why we knew the danceability metric didn't correlate to how people really danced during that test event we did, as an example of that. So, in order to answer the first part of your question, that's already one area where they can benefit from this sort of technology. In terms of that, in terms of this specific app itself, of course. They spend lots of money on curating the right frame, the right mood, the right image for the company, and it gets played. Okay, that's fine if that's what they want, because that's the part of their branding and part of the image. That's fine. And they get a set of music that is in line with all of that. And that's okay, because that's what people want. But after that, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert in this area rather than I, but correct me if I'm wrong. After that, it sort of stops there, and it gets played. And do we know if, let's say, let's take a bar example or example that has a certain theme it wants to play, or a restaurant or a retail outlet that has a certain theme it wants to keep in line. Let's say we have only a few customers, let's say one or two of those customers. And if we allow the customers to give feedback using our system, or if we know something about those 1 or 2 customers before lots of other people come in, would it hurt to re-examine which songs within that superset of songs that you've already curated to promote for that given point in time? Surely then it's making more use of the money you spent on that curated playlist and getting more value out of it, because the circumstances of the specific situation that is currently happening. Because 2 people have walked in, those 2 people, you might know that they are fans of a particular artist. You want to keep into a particular theme, but that particular artist that they like has done a couple of tracks with the theme that you want to keep, and then you start playing those. And then so you win in terms of your theme. The 2 people in the bar or whatever it is are happy because they heard their favorite artist, and you got the most out of that 5 minutes or 10 minutes that you've got. And then maybe more people start coming in, and then you change it up, and then you get the most out of your selections that you want, given the situation. So the further benefit, further to just having better, more objective ratings, more objective feedback, is that there is the chance to get more value out of the curated sets of music that you want, given the current situation or the current circumstances in sort of pseudo real time, but more of a minute by minute level. Because the good thing is, once a music's played, it's sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes long, and you don't need to keep changing it every second. You can keep, you can keep changing it over a few minutes, and during that time, we can do these days we can do plenty of processing in 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and we know a lot by then. And that's, processing power is pretty impressive these days. And we can really understand what's happening at that minute level. So that is really what a lot of businesses and in the industry could really benefit from. And I submit that you would get more out of the lists that you've already paid for at any given time.
No, definitely. I think the missing gap in the industry when it comes to this, and especially like the value of music and the power of music, is the measurement impact that is actually missing, because businesses are measuring everything, especially online. It's very easy, all the advertising, they can base it on that. But unfortunately, the missing link that I've always seen is, how do you do also the measuring actually in a physical store and figuring out what's going on and using the same way of the measuring impact to, drive improvements and better user experiences. So it's very powerful then. What would you then say that GrooveSense is doing better in your technology, and who is your biggest competitor in this space?
There are other, with our current app, which, like I mentioned, it has this social jukeboxing function. There are other apps that exist that do that in a similar way. So through that sense of the social jukeboxing sense, there are some Jukestar, Touch Tunes, Flow Music. There's a few others like that that's been around for a couple of years or more anyway. But having said that, it is just this sort of this group music, selection and done through the pure adherence from all of the users. So there are competitors, at least from that application that GrooveSense is also in that space as well. However, from what we see so far, they don't have the passive sensing. So they don't have that side of it. So it's completely reliant on how people engage and how much they, how much they engage, and also how truthfully they engage in terms of whether they really like something, or there is that subjectivity to it. Our view in terms of the group music playing experience, and my personal view, being a former dancer and party goer, is that I wouldn't want all of my guests to be sat around looking at their phones, right? That kind of contradicts a good time, right? That's in my mind. And others may disagree, but in my mind, that's not what I want my guests to be, jumping and partying and doing the conga and having a great whale of a time, right? That's what I want to see in a party. I don't want them to be sitting around sort of arguing over which song they would like and voting them up or down all the time. So that is one of the fundamental shortcomings in doing the current standard way of doing social jukeboxing. Okay, so what we want to do at GrooveSense is we argue that we've moved on from that, and we are doing social jukeboxing, but slightly differently, in the sense that we don't need to always be reliant on what people's feedback is manually, and they don't need to keep getting out their phones and rating things and all that. They want to be chatting and talking to their friends and dancing and drinking and whatever. That's a party, not sitting around looking at your phone. So the behavior sensing, the passive sensing is all important here. And I reiterate, in that setting, in a party setting, let's say, behavior, the reason why passive sensing isn't, why you might ask, well, why is the passive sensing used everywhere why isn't it all over the place, and why isn't it a multi-billion-dollar global industry right now? It kind of is in some, it is getting much bigger in some sections. One of the challenges is that depending on the situation, the passive sensing can be easier or more difficult to get right. Okay, so depending on how if it's a situation where, like I mentioned, in the office, where people are on best behavior, their actions are a bit more muted. They don't perhaps shout or express themselves too much. They sit around. There's not much, and it's kind of low energy behavior, and there's less to detect, or it's more subtle, and it's harder to really pin down what's happening. I would argue that the party setting is the complete opposite of that, right? It's the complete opposite, where people's behavior is the most exaggerated. All sorts of things go on, and the amount is higher energy levels or lower energy levels, and in between levels, and that's part of what you can measure, is there, and that's the place that people express themselves. One of the places, rather, that people express themselves the most. So if it's one of the places that people express themselves the most, then this expression technology is the place that can be applied more readily. And ergo, this is the hospitality industry and the music industry. And that's the thinking that underpins GrooveSense. So although there are competitors in some sense, I don't think there are any, at least from getting the passive feedback side of things. We believe that, as so far as we've seen through ourselves looking and conversations we've had with lots of people like yourselves and experts everywhere, we don't see that anybody's really started to do this in earnest. And we think that we're probably the first.
And behavior sensing technology is a hot topic, and you've only touched the tip of the iceberg. So what is the next in artificial emotional intelligence, especially with the 5G communication infrastructure, Facebook talking about metaverse? What do you see?
Well, I mean, I think that this in general it's going to start to pervade in lots of other sectors, and we might start to see that. I know that a lot of work's been done in terms of domestic care and care homes and what's going on in those sort of vulnerable population situations and things like that, where it's rightly applied. In terms of what's happening with newer technologies coming up, there's always this issue of, for example, we're talking about sensing and collecting a lot of data, and people are apprehensive about data, and what's being collected, and what's going to happen with this, and how am I going to be affected, and is this going to be adverse effects and things like that. All understandable, and I completely see that point. So with the new forthcoming communications infrastructure that you mentioned, plus advances in other things like processing power, better and efficient algorithmic power and AI and algorithmic power. All of these in combination will allow for more sophisticated systems to be done within the four walls, and towards the edge side of the system. And if a lot of this can be done in situ, a lot of the data can be processed there and then more quickly and more readily, with short high bandwidth communication like 5G, short range, and then we can do more with that. That also helps to prevent concerns about sending data off to servers in other continents and being saved by these giant tech companies, and things can be done locally and in just as powerful a way, and we can get more out of that, and we'll get more instant feedback out of that. So I think the onset of all of these new technologies that you mentioned will allow for more of that sort of thing to happen, and because it's better in terms of privacy and also safety, there's cybersecurity issues as well, right? The more you transmit things all over the place, the more it's prone to nefarious things happening. So that in further to what you're saying, I think we will get more, not necessarily just behavioral sensing, but just more real-time sensing. It doesn't have to be just about human behavior. It can be about anything that happens in real time. And that sort of real world monitoring can be more applicable and done in a sensible and safe way. And I think as that happens, and we will get to be able to do things in a more personalized way. So as for example, there may be the system that's set up for you in your home, or me in my home, or that bar in that place versus another bar in another place won't be exactly the same. There will be differences. There'll be differences in the environment and the ambient area that exists. There'll be differences in the noise levels and what's going on in different settings, and they can be adjusted at a more local level as well, and to get that working better, rather than having a one-size-fits-all approach where we think, well, that algorithm's got to work on you and also that person. It might not be true. There might be a specific set of configuration of technologies that's good for that particular venue or that particular person, and it works better for various reasons, and rather than this one-size-fits-all approach. So we can personalize or localize rather the solutions in a better way. So that I think that's the sensible steps that's going to happen. And again, this is also part of what our thinking as well.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of people say like, oh, if they're gonna analyze me and my sensors, what's happened with my privacy, the security, and how is it going to be used against me? So thank you for sharing that. So what are like the next things happening for GrooveSense going forward?
So from a scientific point of view, because as I lead the science side, I'm probably best placed to answer this. What we want to do is we want to better understand. Obviously, we're developing some of these further behavioral sensing technologies that I mentioned. We've done the movement sensing. We're going to do more audio-visual work with some computer vision analysis, some audio analysis, and various other sensing that we can do that captures the ambient actions that's happening in a particular situation. And these methods are being developed, and that's what we're doing in our next stages to get a better accurate reading of, reading the room. So that's what we want to do there. And we want to engage more with businesses that want to, like you correctly mentioned, want to understand how they can get their reaction and their feedback and their customer and guest experiences in a way that is augmenting what they're already doing, and GrooveSense is set up to work with those sorts of industry people to help them do that. So this is where we're going and how we are moving forward. So again, rather than a one particular technology that is going to be applied to all sorts of different areas, the way we're looking at it at GrooveSense is we understand what the technologies are, because with the people I've talked to and my own research and the other things I've read, we want to focus the ability to do that behavioral sensing in areas that we think are going to be the most successful, and the music-related social settings where people's expressivity is most salient. It is a more readily deployable application, and GrooveSense going forward is going to we hope to be the cutting edge and the leaders in doing that, and speaking to people and advising other industry leaders as well on how to do that, and how we can then bring our expertise to bear for the people who want to start using this in the future, and especially, like you say, when the new infrastructures come into play, because that's where a lot of this will be more readily deployable and allowable, because it would be better, easier to crunch these numbers and these sensing streams and these signals, these high data signals quickly. So that's that's where we want to go, and we want to speak to people, we want to engage with people, and we want to learn what people need in this hospitality and music sector, and we hope to work with lots of people going forward.
Well, from my perspective, I will say that what you guys have and are going to do is really filling a gap in the industry, and it's really needed, and I'm super impressed and I really love it, and I want to thank you very much for letting me share your story and your findings. And if the listeners want to learn more about GrooveSense and get in contact with you, what can they do?
You can go to groovesense.com. That's groove without an E, by the way. So it's GROOVSENSE.com. And there is an email address, so info@groovesense.com. That is anybody can send any queries they want to ask, and one of our team will respond, and we will follow that up. We want people to get in touch or give any feedback they have about our app. Then download our app on both of the stores. If they search for GrooveSense and try it out. If they're having a party and with their guests, try it out and see see how they like it, and if it works for them. And we're a small company, we're a startup. We want to hear from people. We want to understand what people's thoughts are about all of this. And we're all, we're keen to open dialogues with and learn more from the industry as well. So people who are leading this, lots of things in the industry in terms of music venues and an application of curated music in the business sector. We definitely want to hear from all of those great people as well. And so please drop us an email, and we'll be keen to chat to people and learn from you as well. So yeah, info@groovesense.com, and check us out on our website. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Jasmine. It was a great chat, and it's always very encouraging to have a positive support from people like you who have been working in this for such a long time and really know the business, and for you to confirm and that we have something of great value that you see is very encouraging, and we're very grateful for that and for your time.
Well, that's all for today's episode of The Power of Audio, Science and AI. I'm Jasmine Moradi, your host, and thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and support by sharing this content on your social media. This episode is supported by Stockholm Music City.